Vincent van Gogh became one of the most influential painters in art history, but he died in 1890 at the age of 37 after achieving only limited commercial success. He began pursuing art seriously around 1880, roughly 10 years before his death. The paintings now associated with enormous cultural and financial value were made during a life in which he repeatedly depended on his younger brother Theo for money, practical help, and emotional support. This biography of Vincent van Gogh follows the documented decisions, failures, relationships, and relentless work behind that contradiction. Vincent Willem van Gogh was born on March 30, 1853, in Groot-Zundert, a village in the southern Netherlands. His father, Theodorus van Gogh, was a Protestant minister, and his mother, Anna Carbentus van Gogh, came from a family with artistic interests and a strong concern for education. Vincent grew up with 5 younger siblings, Anna, Thilo, Will, Lies, and Co. The family's religious life, rural setting, and ties to the art trade would all shape his early choices. Several Van Gogh relatives worked as art dealers, which gave Vincent an entry into a respectable commercial profession before he had any plan to become a painter. At 16, in 1869, he began an apprenticeship at the Hague branch of Koppel & M.C., a major international art dealership. The job required knowledge of prints, paintings, customers, prices, and the expanding European market for art. Koppel transferred him to London in 1873. He later worked in Paris, where he had access to the city's galleries and the art business at its center. Yet Van Gogh became increasingly dissatisfied with selling art as a commodity. His difficulties were not caused by a lack of exposure to painting. He had seen the machinery of the art market from inside, but he did not settle into its expectations. By 1876, his employment with Koppel had ended. He tried teaching at a boys' school in Ramsgate, England, and later assisted at another school in Isleworth. He also delivered religious instruction and began to imagine a life in the church. The personal life of Vincent van Gogh was already closely tied to a search for purpose, and his changing ambitions worried relatives who expected him to establish a stable occupation. After returning to the Netherlands, Van Gogh worked briefly in a bookshop in Dordrecht. In 1877, he moved to Amsterdam to prepare for university studies in theology. He did not pass the examinations required for that route. He then entered a shorter training program for evangelical work in Brussels, but that path also failed to produce a secure position. His next assignment took him to the Borinage, a coal mining district in Belgium. From late 1878, Van Gogh worked among miners and their families as a lay preacher. Accounts from the period show that he gave away possessions and lived with extreme austerity. Church authorities did not renew his appointment. The loss left him without income, status, or a clear profession. Around 1880, at the age of 27, Van Gogh made the decision that defined the rest of his life: he would become an artist. It was not a leap into a promising career. He had little formal training, no dependable buyers, and no evidence that painting would solve his financial problems. Theo, who had entered the art trade, began providing support that would remain essential for the next decade. Van Gogh first concentrated on drawing. He studied anatomy, perspective, figure construction, and the difficult mechanics of representing workers and rural interiors. He copied prints, worked from plaster cast, and filled pages with studies of hands, heads, tools, and bodies. His early artistic education was largely self-directed, although he also received guidance from established painters. In 1881, he spent time in Etten, where he developed feelings for his recently widowed cousin, Kie Vostricker. She rejected him, and the episode intensified conflict with parts of his family. The event mattered because Van Gogh was trying to build both a career and an adult personal life while remaining financially insecure and dependent on relatives. He moved to The Hague in 1882 and received advice from Anton Mauve, a successful painter related by marriage to the Van Gogh family. Mauve encouraged him to work in watercolor and oil paint. Their relationship later broke down, but the period helped move Van Gogh from drawing toward more ambitious finished works. In The Hague, Van Gogh formed a relationship with Clesina Maria Hornik, known as Sien, a woman living in poverty who had children and was expecting another. He made many drawings of her and her family. The relationship was controversial within his family, and it ended in 1883. It also deepened his interest in people living at the edge of economic security, a subject that dominated his early art. Van Gogh left The Hague for Drenthe in the northeast of the Netherlands, then returned to live with his parents in Nuenen in late 1883. There he focused on peasants, weavers, farm laborers, and village life. His palette was dark, built from browns, olive greens, blacks, and muted earth colors. He wanted to show people whose hands and faces had been shaped by manual work, not fashionable urban subjects designed for easy sale. Noonan produced his first major painting, The Potato Eaters, completed in 1885. The work shows 5 peasants gathered around a table under a lamp as they eat potatoes. Van Gogh intended the painting to emphasize the reality of agricultural labor, especially the hands that had dug the food from the soil. He considered it an important test of whether he could handle a complex multi-figure composition. The painting did not bring the recognition he hoped for. Critics and fellow artists found fault with its anatomy, finish, and color. Van Gogh himself continued to revise his methods, making studies of heads and hands and seeking a more convincing figure style. That response to criticism was practical. He did not abandon painting, but he concluded that he needed wider artistic exposure. His father died in March 1885, during the Noonan period. Later that year, Van Gogh moved to Antwerp, where he studied at the Academy of Fine Arts but struggled with its conventional teaching. Antwerp also exposed him to Japanese woodblock prints, whose flat areas of color, strong outlines, cropped compositions, and unexpected viewpoints would become important to his work. In February 1886, Van Gogh moved to Paris and lived with Theo. The move placed him in the center of the European avant-garde and changed the direction of his painting within months. Theo worked as an art dealer in Paris, but he was more than Vincent's source of funds. He was his closest correspondent, a professional contact, an advocate for his work, and a brother managing his own pressures. The surviving letters between Vincent and Theo are one of the major records of Van Gogh's life. They document requests for money, discussions of paintings, arguments about practical decisions, and Vincent's intense attention to technique. They also show that Theo's support was never an unlimited solution. Vincent needed supplies, rent, food, models, and canvases, while Theo had his own career and later his own family to support. Paris introduced Van Gogh to Impressionism and Neo-Impressionism. He encountered the work of artists including Edgar Degas, Camille Pissarro, Claude Monet, Georges Seurat, and Paul Signac. He also met younger painters working outside academic traditions. Rather than simply copying them, Van Gogh experimented with the use of brighter pigments and visible brushwork. His Dutch paintings had often used deep, shadowed tones. In Paris, he began placing blue beside orange, yellow beside violet, and red beside green to create stronger contrasts. He painted still lives of flowers, restaurants, city streets, windmills, and self-portraits. His self-portraits were partly artistic experiments and partly economical choices, since he could serve as his own model. Japanese prints became another major source of instruction. Van Gogh collected them, displayed them in his rooms, copied particular compositions, and borrowed their simplified forms and emphatic color. Paris did not instantly make him successful, but it gave him tools that would make his later work unmistakable. The personal life of Vincent van Gogh during these years remained unstable. He was living with Theo, working intensely, and trying to establish himself among artists who already had networks, exhibitions, and dealers. By early 1888, he chose to leave Paris for Arles in the south of France. He hoped that stronger light, lower living costs, and distance from the city would help him work more effectively. Van Gogh arrived in Arles in February 1888. The southern landscape transformed his color again. He painted orchards in bloom, fields, bridges, street scenes, cafes, and portraits with yellows, blues, reds, and greens that often ignored naturalistic restraint. Paintings from Arles included the night cafe, the bedroom, the night cafe terrace, and several versions of sunflowers. He rented rooms in the building later known as the Yellow House. There he formed an ambitious plan for an artist community in the south. Van Gogh wanted painters to live and work together, share expenses, exchange ideas, and create an alternative to the Paris-centered art world. His hope for companionship was connected directly to his artistic plans. Paul Gauguin was the painter Van Gogh most wanted to join him. Theo helped make Gauguin's visit possible, and Gauguin arrived in Arles in October 1888. The two artists worked side by side for about 9 weeks. They discussed art, painted some related subjects, and influenced each other, but their temperaments and methods were different. Van Gogh often worked directly before the motif, rapidly responding to what he saw. Gauguin increasingly favored working from memory and imagination. Their disagreements became serious, though the surviving evidence does not justify turning either man into a simple villain. Both were ambitious painters under financial pressure, living in close quarters and pursuing incompatible working habits. In late December 1888, after a conflict with Gauguin, Van Gogh injured his ear and was hospitalized in Arles. The core facts are clear: he suffered a serious ear injury, Gauguin left Ols, and Van Gogh received hospital treatment. The exact sequence of events, the motive, and the extent of the injury have been debated, so responsible accounts cannot claim certainty beyond the documented record. The crisis ended the immediate dream of an artist's colony. Yet Van Gogh continued painting after leaving the hospital. He made portraits, landscapes, still lifes, and scenes of Ols, even as recurrent periods of illness disrupted his life. His work from this period should not be reduced to a medical symptom. It came from years of study, deliberate color theory, observation, and a self-imposed discipline of constant production. In May 1889, Van Gogh voluntarily entered Saint Paul de Montceau, an asylum at Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. He had a room and later access to a studio. The institution provided treatment and supervision during a period when he and those close to him recognized that his condition required care. At Saint-Rémy, his health varied. There were periods when illness limited his ability to work, and other periods when he painted and drew intensely. He made studies from the asylum grounds, nearby olive groves, cypresses, gardens, and rocky landscapes. He also copied works after artists he admired, including Jean-François Millet, using reproductions as starting points for his own transformations. The Starry Night was painted at Saint-Rémy in 1889. Its swirling sky, bright stars, crescent moon, cypress, and distant village have made it one of the most recognizable paintings in the world. But it was not a literal transcription of a single view. Van Gogh combined observation, memory, and formal invention, as he often did when pursuing an image more expressive than a straightforward record of the landscape. Other major Saint-Rémy works included paintings of irises, olive trees, wheat fields, and cypresses. In these pictures, the brushwork often moves in visible rhythms across the surface. The effect was not accidental. Van Gogh used repeated marks, directional strokes, and complementary colors to give landscape a constructed visual energy. His medical condition has been the subject of many retrospective theories, but no definitive modern diagnosis can be made from a distance. What can be documented is that he experienced episodes of illness, received treatment in hospitals and at Saint-Rémy, and continued to write and make art when he was able. Explaining his painting solely through illness ignores the technical decisions and artistic influences visible across his entire career. Theo remained central throughout this period. In 1889, Theo married Johanna Bonja, known as Jo, and their son Vincent Willem was born in January 1890. Vincent was pleased that his nephew had been named after him, but he also worried that his need for money made him a burden on Theo's growing household. That concern was part of the personal life of Vincent Van Gogh, where affection and financial dependence were inseparable. By 1890, there were signs that his reputation was beginning to move beyond a small circle. In January, the Brussels group Les XX exhibited 6 of his paintings. One of them, The Red Vineyard, was purchased by the Belgian artist Anna Bock, in what is widely cited as his only confirmed sale of a painting during his lifetime. The broader record of exchanges and other transactions is more complicated, but his commercial success remained very limited. In the same year, the critic Albert Aurier published an enthusiastic article about Van Gogh in the Mercure de France. The review recognized the force of his color and personal style. It did not turn him into a famous artist overnight, but it showed that some critics and artists were beginning to see the importance of his work. In May 1890, Van Gogh left Saint-Rémy and moved to Auvers-sur-Oise, north of Paris. The location put him closer to Theo and placed him under the care of Dr. Paul Gachet, a physician who was also interested in art and knew several artists. Van Gogh quickly began painting the town, its fields, its houses, and the people around him. His output in Auvers was remarkably concentrated. He painted portrait of Dr. Gachet, the church at Auvers, portraits of local residents, gardens, wheat fields, and rural buildings. These final works vary greatly in mood and method. Some use broad, forceful lines and sharply tilted forms, others are quieter studies of village life. Wheatfield with Crows is often treated as Van Gogh's final painting, but that claim cannot be established with certainty. It was made during his last weeks, but the precise order of many Auvers works remains uncertain. The painting's dramatic visual language has encouraged later interpretations, yet chronology should not be invented where the evidence is incomplete. On July 27, 1890, Van Gogh suffered a gunshot wound in Auvers-sur-Oise. He died 2 days later, on July 29, aged 37. Suicide remains the prevailing historical conclusion, supported by the traditional account and accepted by most scholars. Alternative theories have been proposed, but they remain disputed and have not replaced the established account. Theo came to Overs after the shooting and was present before Vincent died. The brothers' relationship had shaped nearly every stage of Vincent's artistic life. Theo's support enabled him to buy materials and continue working, while their letters preserved a detailed account of his artistic development. Theo himself died in January 1891, less than 6 months after Vincent. The rise of Van Gogh's reputation depended heavily on Theo's widow, Jo Van Gogh. After Theo's death, she was left with a young son, Vincent's paintings, and his letters. Rather than dispersing the work quickly, she preserved much of the collection, lent paintings to exhibitions, arranged sales strategically, and promoted the correspondence that explained Vincent's ideas in his own words. Jo's choices gave later audiences access not only to the paintings but also to the record of how they were made. The letters showed an artist who studied color, anatomy, printmaking, literature, religion, rural labor, and the work of other painters. They corrected the simplified image of Van Gogh as a figure who painted only through uncontrolled impulse. During the 1890s and early 1900s, exhibitions in the Netherlands, France, Germany, and elsewhere brought his work to new audiences. Younger artists responded to his intense color and expressive brushwork. His influence became especially important for artists associated with Expressionism, who saw in his paintings a model for using distorted form and saturated color to convey experience rather than merely imitate appearances. Van Gogh was not completely unknown when he died. He had exhibited work, received some favorable attention, and sold at least one painting that can be firmly documented. But the scale of his recognition during his lifetime was tiny compared with the global status he achieved afterward. His fame was built through surviving paintings, letters, exhibitions, collectors, critics, museums, and the careful advocacy of Jo Van Gogh. A biography of Vincent van Gogh therefore cannot be reduced to a story of instant genius discovered too late. He spent years in art dealing, religious work, drawing practice, failed relationships, financial uncertainty, and technical experimentation before developing the style now recognized around the world. The vivid Ols paintings, the Saint Remy landscapes, and the final works at Overs came from a decade of concentrated labor. The personal life of Vincent van Gogh also cannot be separated from the art. His family's art trade connections opened his first professional door. Theo's money and correspondence made continued work possible. His search for companionship shaped his hopes in Ols, while illness and institutional treatment affected where and when he could paint. None of these facts alone explains the paintings, but together they explain the conditions under which he made them. Vincent van Gogh did not become a defining artist because his own generation immediately understood him. His work became visible to the world because it survived, because his letters documented its purpose, and because those who inherited it made sure it was seen.